FTX crypto exchange went belly up, and we thought, well, let's bring somebody in who's super credible in crypto, and that's friend of the pod.
He's credible because he's wearing a tie.
Yeah. Hey, Brian Armstrong, how are you doing, brother?
Brian Armstrong, you look fantastic.
Yeah. What are you testifying today?
I'm doing great. It's not Montclair and it's not Laura Piana, but normally I just wear the black T-shirt and the hoodie, but when times like this, I got to go talk to media, policymakers, regulators, and it's a good time to spruce up the image.
This is a week to break out the tie.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, Men's Warehouse, it never looked better. You look great.
Thank you.
I see a red tie and I think fiscally responsible.
All right. I guess, Brian, just to kick it off, FTX in spectacular fashion blew up this week, and it's pretty gnarly. You run an exchange as well. What's your take on what happened with FTX? And then what is your position in terms of making sure your customers understand that Coinbase is not going to have a similar fate to all the other exchanges that seem to be blowing up every couple of months?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we were all shocked that somebody like Sam, who seemingly is so smart and capable, ended up in this situation where he appears to have done something quite unethical and illegal. So, my job right now this week has been to go out there and just help people understand that Coinbase is not like that. We've been pursuing a different strategy for the last 10 years. We're a public company. We're regulated. Our financial statements are audited. They can show that, customer funds are segregated. They're backed 1-to-1. We're not investing customer assets without their explicit direction. And so that's been the first step, is just to make sure people understand that. But then after that, we need to kind of think about how we go forward as an industry here and both take a long-term perspective, make sure the good companies in the space aren't allowing one or two bad actors to kind of mess it up for everybody else. And it feeds into the whole regulatory story too, because companies like Coinbase are already regulated, but we're regulated like a traditional financial service business. But we don't have clarity about the crypto-specific regulations, like what's a commodity, what's a security. And that lack of regulatory clarity, I believe, has pushed a lot of this business offshore to these less regulated exchanges. That's part of what caused the blow up today. They were based in the Bahamas, and there's not sophisticated financial regulators overseeing what they were doing.
Can you just, in a nutshell, explain what happened?
Yeah. So my understanding is, and again, this is from people I've talked to, and I spoke with Sam and CZ briefly during this, but I didn't get details from them. I got it from other people.
You spoke to them this week.
Yeah. This was all going down. I spoke to Sam about, he was trying to raise emergency financing and things like that. And I spoke to CZ about why he was considering buying the asset. I thought it was a bad idea. But my understanding of what happened at this point, and again, I don't have all the facts. This is just my understanding, is that, FTX was in a position where they had this market maker, Alameda, that was investing in risky things. And that's fine. Like market makers, hedge funds, they're designed to take more risk. It appears at this point that back during the last shakeup in the crypto industry where, Terra Luna and Voyager and Celsius and Three Arrows went under, it appears that Alameda took a big loss at that time as well. They may have even been underwater. And instead of just saying, hey, this hedge fund's going to blow up too, which would have been unfortunate. People would, Sam would have lost money. It's embarrassing, but it's not illegal for a hedge fund to blow up. It happens with some regularity. Instead of just letting it blow up, it seems like at this point, he took customer funds.
Wait, you have to explain. He owns both. That's for the people that may not understand that. Yeah.
Right.
So it's a related party.
He owns his own exchange called FTX, and he owns his own hedge fund called Alameda,
which operates inside of FTX as well as in other places, right? But again, Alameda seems to have blown up. Sorry, Brian, back to you.
Yeah, so it seems they had this solvency issue, and instead of just letting it blow up, Sam basically said, hey, we have a bunch of customer assets over here at FTX, or he somehow basically made a loan from FTX into Alameda to try to prop it up. I don't know why he did that. That's the moment in my mind where he crossed the line into probably committing fraud. And I think he probably lied to users, lied to investors, and he went around and tried to bail out these different companies like Voyager and BlockFi and to sort of prop up this thing. And maybe he thought he could trade his way out of it or something. I'm not sure, but that seems to be where the mistake was made.
Can you explain the contagion, by the way, just so we can, because everyone's been talking about the contagion and understanding what's next. So that's what I just want to, because I think people are going to be asking that a lot this weekend.
Yeah, so I do think there is some contagion risk here I think there's other firms that had, first of all, there's firms that had money just sitting in FTX, and that's now going through bankruptcy court. So that's been bad. I mean, Multicoin came out publicly and said that they had 10% of their portfolio sorted on FTX. There's other firms that Alameda may have had loans with, and those firms are probably struggling. I don't want to say who, but we have received a couple of inbound calls from other people trying to get emergency financing. There's people who may have just totally different from FTX and Alameda. They may have just had their own portfolio that they took margin or leverage on to buy crypto. And now as the prices have come down a little bit, they're getting stopped out. So that's all been very challenging. And I again, just for the sake of clarity, I should say that Coinbase did not have any material exposure to Alameda FTX or FTT token.
Brian, the question is, now that we know what happened, which is all of these crazy inter-party related transactions and all of this stuff seems very illegal. There was a bankruptcy filing today, and up until today, it seemed like this issue was really about FTX International and Alameda, and it didn't touch FTX US, which for a long time tried to position itself as well run and regulated as Coinbase. To be, they tried to say that. But now, if you look inside the Wall Street Journal, all the articles say that this is actually FTX Group, so the whole thing seems to be imperiled. Can you just help us explain that? Because now that's a lot of U.S. people that were following the rules, thinking that this thing was matched one-to-one, that may be also affected.
Yeah. So, look, I don't know who inside FTX's and its orbit of companies actually knew that the fraud had been taking place. It would not surprise me. I have no idea, to be honest, but it would not surprise me if FTX US people and employees had no idea that this was happening. I'm imagining if Sam was doing, when he started doing this, he probably wanted to keep it to a very small group. Otherwise, this is the kind of thing that leaks and the whole thing blows up. Now, that being said, I don't necessarily think FTX US is worth anything as a business right now because of the brand being so tainted. And there probably was not great separation of these entities in the sense of, did they have truly separate boards and beneficial owners and governance? And Sam seems to have, it appears that FTX didn't really have a CFO or maybe even like a real board or anything like that. And so it's hard for me to imagine.
We found on Reddit, there was an article that appeared that said that the head of compliance at FTX was also the head of compliance at a poker site called Ultimate Bet, which in the 2010s did this exact thing, apparently. Some version of this where they went in and they looked at hole cards of poker players, and then a few employees inside the business would basically play against these folks, knowing what the hole cards were, ran this cheat, stole millions of dollars. Somehow that person found a way to be head of compliance at FTX.
Yeah.
10 years later. So now what happens now is you have the international business and the US business and Alameda Research all rolled up into this one frozen entity, right? With now regulators having to... So do you know what happens in a process like this? Like, is it that the DOJ and the SEC get priority, or is there some international monetary... Like, who unwinds all of this? How do people get their money back, if at all?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert at this, but my high-level understanding is that the bankruptcy courts will essentially... And I believe they filed bankruptcy in the US, which is an interesting thing. I didn't know why they did that versus Bahamas. But anyway, the bankruptcy court will basically go through and try to find any assets of value. So, I mean, they still have some tokens and value. They have a venture portfolio. I think Sam owned 9% of Robinhood. There's various things that they may own. And then they'll kind of auction those off to various bidders on distressed assets and then try to distribute those funds to the customers. I don't know the exact process beyond that, though.
I mean, if you remember, the Madoff wind down took many years. And for years, he was trying to find assets. And then he found a market, sold them. There's the trustee. I think he's still active. And then, tried to redistribute the funds. Obviously, so many more customers here than there was with Madoff. But it can be a very long and winding process to identify all the assets, then run the market sale process on them, then figure out who gets what first, and then distribute.
There was an interesting thing that Larry Summers did, I think, for Bloomberg, where he was asked whether this was Lehman or Enron. And he said, it seems more like an Enron than it is a Lehman. And Brian, I'm just curious how you think about it. Like, is this sort of a fraud perpetuated by a group of executives to essentially take advantage of a situation? Or do you think that this is more like a Lehman situation, which is a well-run business, I guess, that just, got caught in a liquidity trap?
I think my guess is it's a little more like Enron in the sense that, yes, they were over levered and that kind of thing, but the minute that they moved customer funds in some way, shape, or form to backstop the hedge fund, that was, in my mind, fraud. And, that's more like Enron.
We're probably running out of time with you because you said you had a hard stop. So let's ask the $1 million question. Tell us about SBF. Like, who is this character?
When did you first suspect?
Yeah, what's your read on the psychology
that this wasn't legit?
Do you think that it was his altruistic intent that allowed himself to convince himself to do this? Or do you think this was like malicious the whole way? Or what's your sense of the guy?
So again, I'm speculating here. I've spent time with him. I've met him a bunch of times, and I have to say, I did not see this coming. Like he appeared to me to be a very bright, credible, competent person, perhaps a bit young, perhaps, a bit reckless at times, but not unethical and not committing fraud. I definitely did not see that. If I look back to see, were there any warning signs that I should have thought twice about it? One of the things I noticed was that in 2021, Coinbase had a good year. We did $7 billion in revenue, $4 billion of positive EBITDA. We became public as a company. At that time, FTX did about $1 billion in revenue. And I knew how much money we had for our venture budget and just like different investments we wanted to make. And I knew their revenue. And I had to scratch my head a bunch of times. And I was like, where is this guy getting all this liquidity? Because he was like buying 9% of Robinhood. He was putting like $1 billion into this. He was donating to all these politicians. And I was like, it did not make sense to me where he was getting all this cash. People just kept telling me, oh, his market maker Alameda is just printing cash. And I was like, okay, I guess, it seems like a conflict of interest to own an exchange and a market maker. That's why we haven't done it, but more power to him, I guess. And so I was surprised. I didn't speak up. I can't explain the psychology of it at this point, whether he's a pathological liar or if he's started off good and somehow under the pressure of this whole thing went bad. But the minute you can go watch the interviews, he's lying to people about why he's bailing out Voyager and BlockFi and he knew at that time that most likely he knew at that time that they were not solvent. Alameda was not solvent, and so that's where he crossed a major line in my book.
And we see it time and time again. Elizabeth Holmes, Bernie Madoff. Once the lie gets too big, you can't get out of it anymore. If that's the case, really incredible.
Brian, to the question I asked before about the SEC and what should happen, you said, I want to pick up on what you said, which is the SEC doesn't seem motivated. Why is the SEC, in your mind, not motivated?
Well, I think you're right. I hope that they use this as a moment to come together and help, local companies in the US being built here to end up in a better place. And I do believe, David, I think said it's right. It is a political issue at this point. There's going to be a major impetus to get the clarity here in the US and hopefully to help build the companies here in the US that are going to serve the rest of the world and in every major financial hub. So we're committed to building that together with all the regulators around the world. And crypto's here to stay. This is a temporary setback, but I'm here to keep building and make this thing happen.
Find out who did SBF give all this money to, because he was touted as one of the future biggest donors to the Democratic Party. If you want signals, I would say there were some pretty big signals here. Number one, he said he's going to donate $1 billion to the Democratic Party, and he kept touting this like effective altruism, whatever, the saving the world stuff. Now, why do you need to do that unless you're reputation laundering and trying to buy political protection? Come on. Okay. You don't think that was a little bit of a signal?
Right. Here, I'll tell you an even more explicit signal. He pitched us in that $17 billion round, and I did a Zoom with him. And after the Zoom, I'm like, this doesn't make much sense, but I'll have my team do some work. We did some work, and we sent him a 2-page deck. And we said, here are our recommendations for taking the next step. One was the formation of a board. The second was the creation of dual class stock. The third was some reps and warranties around affiliated transactions and related party transactions. And the person that worked there called us back and literally, I'm not kidding you, said, go fuck yourself. Was quote unquote the response to us. We're like, okay. So that was the easy decision, but
message received.
Message received, but I still thought, okay, I'll just put that in the bucket of these guys are unbelievably arrogant and smug. But Brian, I thought what you thought, which is Maybe it's because they've created some money making machine in the Bahamas, and so they have that level of confidence. But then to see this thing to the extent of which is now, we're only scratching the surface, guys. We're going to find out stuff every day.
The postmortem is going to be crazy. But let's thank Brian Armstrong for joining us. I know it was a very busy day, and what a great, candid, insightful.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.